And there's always a but. You have to be extremely careful when you do this, because if you do it too often, you could be causing some pretty severe problems. What's going on, guys? My name is Jake, and this is your Body Comp Prescription. As always, I hope you're all having a great day. And for today's video, we're going to be talking about occlusion training, or better known as blood flow restriction training. So this video idea actually came from my girlfriend. She actually brought it up to me the other day, and she asked me, I guess she saw a TikTok, and there was a girl who she says is always wearing these occlusion bands. And I don't know if she'd ever seen them before, but she asked me and she said, is there really any application for this? Does it actually work, basically? And I thought this was a great question because this isn't one that I get asked a lot, to be honest. And I figured since she asked it, there's probably some of you out there who are curious about it as well. So let's jump right into it and I'll break it all down for you. So what is occlusion training or blood flow restriction training? Obviously, blood flow restriction training is a little bit more self-explanatory, but to occlude means to stop, close up, obstruct. And when we're talking about training here, we're talking about like veins and blood flow, basically. Actually, this is a really good example. So I had my blood taken out earlier today. I went to the hospital to get some blood work done, and they used this gauze and some wrap to occlude the puncture that they basically made when they stuck the needle in. But when we're talking about training in particular, you can use something like a resistance band, wrist wraps, things like that. Anything that you can use to tie around a limb to help slow blood flow. And obviously you don't want to make this too tight because then you're going to start to lose feeling in that limb, and then it's going to become basically pointless because then you're not going to be able to train whatsoever. And the primary goal is to reduce the amount of blood flow that returns back to your heart. So by tying off that limb, you're going to be trying to keep that blood in that limb. And then this lack of oxygenated blood going to the muscle group that's working is going to create a lot of metabolic stress. AKA, it's going to make your muscle a lot more tired a lot more quickly. And for example, if I wanted to try blood flow restriction training or occlusion training on my bicep, what I would do is I would take probably like a wrist wrap, a resistance band, something like that. So by tying off this limb, we're trying to keep blood flow from our shoulder down. And then that's going to make the exercise a lot harder for us to do. So let's talk about some of the potential benefits first. One of the benefits of blood flow restriction training or occlusion training is that it's going to be a lot lower impact on your joints. Because the exercise is going to be a lot harder to do because of that lack of blood flow, you're going to be forced to use a lot lighter weight, which is going to make it a lot easier on your joints. So you might be able to achieve the same amount, if not greater, muscle damage as you would with the same exercise doing traditional technique without occlusion training with greater weight. And because the weight that you're going to be using is going to be lighter, you can probably argue that the reduced amount of stress on your joints could increase your longevity in the gym. Another application for blood flow restriction training would be if you have any kind of chronic neuromuscular disorders. So if you have something like MS or any kind of case of severe muscular atrophy, occlusion training could be a practical way that you could stimulate muscle growth, because it won't be as much stress on your joints, but it should cause enough muscle damage to stimulate muscle growth. And you probably won't have to do as much volume. And another benefit of occlusion training is that it's a great intensity technique. If you don't necessarily feel like bumping up your weight or adding another set, adding an extra rep, or decreasing your rest time, you can use occlusion training to make your workouts harder without necessarily adding a whole bunch of extra volume. And just continuing off that thought of not necessarily needing to increase load or volume, I see this as a really good way to rehab people who are injured. So a lot of times what you do in physical therapy is stuff that you would do in the gym, just with a lot lighter load and a lot more emphasis on technique. So if you're coming back from injury, you can use something like occlusion training or blood flow restriction training to ramp up your intensity and work on your muscular development as you get your way back into the gym. And I've got one more. I think I saved the best one for last, at least in my eyes. The most important benefit for occlusion training or blood flow restriction training is if you don't have access to a lot of equipment because you like to work out at home, or your gym doesn't necessarily have the widest range of machines and dumbbells and all that kind of stuff, you can use occlusion training as one of your main variables of progressive overload. And I'm pretty sure we all know by now that you need progressive overload if you want to continue to make progress in the gym and build muscle. So if you don't have access to a lot of equipment, you can use these things like bands and wraps to occlude certain muscles or limbs to achieve a great workout without necessarily needing a bunch of weight or fancy equipment. So for all my people that like to work out at home, this might be something you want to look into. But, and there's always a but, you have to be extremely careful when you do this, because if you do it too often, you could be causing some pretty severe problems. We just finished going over the benefits, but we need to talk about the cons as well. First off, if you have any kind of blood pressure issue, this should basically be off the table for you. And I'm no physician, but this can be really dangerous. So if this is something that you're interested in, please go see your doctor, talk to them about it. Don't just take my word for it, because this can be really dangerous if you have any pre-existing blood pressure issues. Con number 2, it hurts like hell. Let me tell you, I've tried it before. It's actually been a long time since I've done it, but if you can't handle the pain of lactic acid, so when you get fatigued and you start feeling the burn, if you can't handle that kind of pain, I don't recommend trying blood flow restriction training. And if this is done properly, it's gonna hurt. So if that's a big red flag for you, I would probably stay away from blood flow restriction training. And probably the biggest con of them all is that you can actually permanently damage your veins if you do occlusion training too often or if you do it improperly. So this is a video right here that I found of a girl who actually did occlusion training very, very frequently when it came to her legs. And as you can see, she put the occlusion bands right below her glutes, which then tied off her blood flow to her legs and below. And because she did it too often, she actually ended up damaging her veins and needed to get them surgically repaired. And now she's forced to wear compression sleeves almost all the time to help keep her legs warm to keep blood flow moving. So be careful with this. And what I find interesting about all this, at least from what I've seen, is that it seems like it's mainly girls who are interested in occlusion training. I'm not sure if it's some sort of influencer thing, like some popular influencer got like a discount code and then they're like marketing it out to everyone, or what the deal is. But I have been seeing more and more girls in the gym using occlusion bands or some form of blood flow restriction training around their legs, thinking that it's gonna help get them bigger glutes or bigger legs. And I know that there's a lot of girls out there that are trying to grow their glutes and get a bigger butt and all that, but we have to think about the anatomy a little bit on that as well, because when I think of occlusion training, I don't think it really works for the glutes or things like the back or the chest just because of their functions and the way that the anatomy is set up. The main muscles that you can probably use them for are your quads, your hamstrings, calves, and probably your biceps and triceps. Because when you think about all those muscles individually, they mainly have one function, and they have a far enough distance away from the joint in order for them to actually be tied off properly. So I would say if you're looking to do occlusion training, you're probably gonna wanna restrict it to everything like below your shoulder and then everything below your glutes, because those are gonna be the easiest things for you to tie off properly, which will then limit that oxygenated blood flow back to that muscle group. And one thing that I want you guys to keep in mind, if this is something that you're actually interested in trying out for yourself, don't do it too often, because again, if you're doing it too frequently, or if you're using too much weight, or you're using it with too much volume, that's when you're gonna start running into those cons that we talked about earlier. So I would probably suggest limiting occlusion training to one specific exercise, for maybe 3 to 6 sets per week. And one thing that you're probably gonna notice right off the bat when you try occlusion training, other than how bad it hurts, is how pumped you're gonna be. You're probably gonna look a lot more vascular alongside some discoloration in your limb. And this is me just kind of thinking out loud, but I do think that blood flow restriction training, occlusion training, does have a lot of practical applications to it, a lot of practical ways to apply it to your training, to get a lot of benefits from it. And as long as you're smart and you're not overdoing it, like you're only using it maybe like once a week on a lagging body part, you might be able to see some good muscle growth from it. I was looking into some studies to see what the science is saying behind this aside from my own opinion. And I actually found quite a few studies that were all agreeing that said that occlusion training, blood flow restriction training was a good way to increase muscle size. And if you're interested in reading any of those articles, I'll go ahead and leave links to them in the description. But I am really interested to see if this does work long term. I'm not afraid to be my own lab rat and test subject and all that kind of stuff. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try occlusion training on my calves to see if that helps them grow at all. Now my calves have been growing a tiny bit, probably because of my calorie surplus, as well as my training. But I wanna see if occlusion training is gonna take that to the next level and try and put some more mass on my calves. But I think I'm gonna wrap the video up here. This was a really interesting one to talk about. Again, shout out to Kelsey for the video idea. This is one that I actually had to think about a little bit, and I had to do some background research before wanting to give an answer, just because I didn't want to give out any misinformation. I hope you guys found this video interesting and or helpful. Like I said, I do think I am gonna try this on myself, on my calves, and then I'll keep you guys up to date on how that goes. But if you have any more questions regarding blood flow restriction training, occlusion training, go ahead and drop those down in the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer those for you guys. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch this video. If you did enjoy it, I'd really appreciate it if you dropped a like. And if you're new around here, please consider subscribing. But thanks again for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.